the session, and we are starting recording. And so what I'm going to do is I'll start up my PowerPoint just as a guide. The PowerPoint can be a little bit discouraging when you take a look at the number of slides that I have, but suffice to say, I will sort of motor through these slides pretty quickly. And again, based on the fact that we have a relatively small group, I'm hoping that there's some time to get some dialogue and some conversation going as we kind of move forward. So annual planning considerations, from a background perspective, for those of you that aren't familiar with my background, I've been a high-tech participant at the sales and the sales leadership, and also at the CEO level for the last 25 years or so, prior to starting Bytown Ventures, and started the company about 3 years ago, primarily with go-to-market consulting services. So I wanted to bring some of the experience that I brought to the table, with some of the organizations that I worked with to new organizations. And I do quite a bit of that with that sort of sales background in mind. But I fell in love with a system about 2 years ago as well, called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which can help you run an organization or a company. So I do a couple things. I do go-to-market consulting. I provide implementation services for EOS. And then the last thing, but certainly not the least, is provide some leadership development consulting through a methodology that's been taught to me by my father, who's on the webinar as well. So welcome, Mike. Mike's written a book called Leading Matters, and we'll get into maybe some of the topics here as we talk about annual planning. But I'll just jump into the very first sort of slide here, and just talk to you about the agenda. So we're going to frame up what annual planning actually means. So there are some nuances that we have to be aware of. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some annual planning formats. There's no perfect formula, but generally speaking, there's a couple things that you're going to want to cover off from a format perspective, and I'll give you some perspective on that, and actually some practical exercises that you can go through as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about the nuances of tactics versus strategy versus team health versus leadership. All four really should be covered in any annual planning session. So the very first thing that I want to start is I just want to start with a quote, and this is Yogi Berra, former catcher for the New York Yankees, and one of his famous quotes, and he's got quite a few, was, "If you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else." And really that quote speaks to the merit and the value of annual planning. And he has a couple of other really good ones, maybe not as relevant to this session, but I just copied down a couple as I was getting ready for this, and they're quite funny. So one of them is, if the world were perfect, it wouldn't be. And then the other one is, baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical. So if you Google Yogi, you'll get about 50 or 60 or maybe even more quotes that some relevant, some quite funny. And the next thing that I just want to speak quickly to is this is a picture of a sales kickoff that I participated in when I was the CEO of 4Point. We were a big Adobe partner, and we were such a big Adobe partner that we were invited to their sales kickoff on an annual basis, almost as part of the team. And I love sales kickoffs. As a former VP of sales, it's really something that I enjoy, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. But the reality is, this kickoff, and this particular one, I think we were in Las Vegas, and we probably had 5,000 or 6,000 sales, marketing, and pre-sales engineers at this particular conference. Didn't get pulled off, even though it was a 3-day conference, without a bunch of planning. And so generally speaking, when you're getting ready for a sales kickoff or a company kickoff, there's a process that you go through. And that process for your organizations, if you're on calendar, hopefully has started. And so, the process is a combination of a bunch of different things, and we'll get into that. But you should be starting to talk about your next year's plans about 3 months in advance. And you should start out from a leadership perspective, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the director of sales, the VP of sales, sales manager. You should be starting to talk to customers. You should be starting to talk to your people, and you should be getting information that will help you create ultimately, a 1 to 2 day annual planning session with your senior leaders as you get ready for that, either that employee or that sales kickoff. And one thing that I just really quickly want to touch on, some people confuse strategic planning with annual planning, and really the two are quite different. So strategic planning is something that you should be doing probably every couple of years. You should probably be doing it in the middle of the year. You should probably be, investing in a methodology from a strategic perspective. Your board should be involved, and the strategy that you create for your organization is something that you ultimately will start executing on. And annual planning is more about the execution of that strategy. There are some strategy components that you do touch on in every annual planning exercise, but really this is not about strategy. This is about execution. And so that's the very first thing that I want to speak to. And then really another quick guide for you, strategic versus annual, just give you an idea of who the responsible parties might be in strategic planning versus annual planning. So when you're doing strategic planning, you've got your board involved, you've got your investors, maybe your key investors involved. You will have your C-level, but the annual planning is more to do with C-level, but also the senior leadership team within an organization. And then take that even a step further, cascade that a bit more. If you're doing annual planning for your sales team, which I did quite a bit, either as a director of sales or a VP of sales, basically it's you and your team, right? And so that's important. Your time frame is typically 1 to 3 months, so it's not too late if you haven't started your annual planning process yet. And your time frame should always be the next year. You should be looking out the next year, as opposed to strategy, which is typically couple of years of advance notice. And so just a quick delineation that I wanted to speak to. Now on strategy, this is not a strategy talk, but I do have some recommendations. There's a number of strategic frameworks that I've become aware of, that I've used in the past, that I have clients using. So a big client of ours is Colonnade Bridgeport and a bunch of their companies, and so they're big believers in the playing to win strategic methodology by Roger Martin. And I've just got an integrated cascade of choices off to the side here that kind of at a high level summarizes the methodology. But there's a book that you should read, and there's an implementation that you should go through. There's another great strategic, and then there's a little bit of tactics here. A book called The 3 HAG Way by Shannon Cisco. So 3 HAG stands for highly achievable goals. So I'd recommend that. The Strategizer business model canvas is something that a lot of organizations are familiar with, especially startups. And it's really, really good. And it really covers off on some of the different components. And then last but not least, there is the system that I teach called, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which has a strategic component. But even though I'm a big believer in EOS, the strategic component of it is kind of high level stuff. So you don't really get into the details. So I would certainly recommend that you look at some other strategic methodologies as you move forward. So what does an annual plan define? So a strong annual plan builds on the company's broader strategic vision. So again, we've done the strategy work in advance, and on its core values. And the core value component is so important. We'll get into that, while still providing specific goals, metrics, and budgets to guide managers and employees. So really, annual planning is tactical with some strategic components. Really, that's the main point that I want to get across here. So from an annual planning format perspective, again, you should have 2 to 3 months of ideation, feedback, and assessment, culminating in typically 2 days of work with your senior leadership team. It should be offsite. Now, this is pre-COVID, of course. And it should be facilitated by the leader or someone outside of the organization. And when you facilitate an annual planning session on your own, that's something I've done over the years. There's challenges. I guess the main benefit is cost, right? I was typically working for startups, bootstrap startups, or organizations that were watching their pennies. So I wasn't having to go out and hire an external person that I would have to invest time in explaining my business to and whatnot. But just know that if you're facilitating annual planning on your own, sometimes you're a little too close to the issues at hand. And so maybe it might make sense to bring in someone that is perhaps within the organization, but not as close as to what you're doing. So definitely get facilitation or facilitate yourself, have a plan for that. And then the beauty of COVID, and there are very few beauties to COVID, let's be honest, is it really has accelerated this Zoom mindset. And what I found is when I'm doing strategic planning now with organizations, when I'm doing annual planning and specifically EOS implementation, typically what I would do is I would tell the senior leadership team to get together in a boardroom. Sometimes we'd have people flying in from different locations. And so it'd always be a full day session. And by hour 6 or hour 7, you're rushing through things. There's some really important exercises that you're going through and you're just rushing through it because people are tired. And so the beauty of what's happened in the last 8 months or so is where it used to be 2 days, offsite with maybe some team building on the first night. What you can do now is you can do 4 half-day sessions where you take the content and you make sure that everyone is energized and refreshed for each component, each logical component of the annual planning session. And so I think that is one of the few things that's come out of this situation that we're in that's been really good, and it'll get people thinking a little bit more differently about the annual planning session, because it always used to be 2 days off at Montebello. I was actually part of an organization once, and this was kind of cool. The founder had a condominium in the Cayman Islands, and so we would fly to the Caymans for 3, actually it would be for 4 or 5 days. But really, there'd only be 2 days of annual planning, and then we'd be on the beach for the rest of it. And that was cool. And there was some teamwork elements there. But by halfway through the second day, everyone was just looking out the window, right? So, anyways, just a couple of quick comments on the annual planning format. And then, of course, everything that you've put together, you should celebrate with a kickoff, whether it's a sales kickoff, whether it's a company kickoff. You do need to take this plan and you need to spend time educating and communicating your vision for the next year to your people. If you're not doing that, and if you're not doing that in a fun environment, really you're missing out on probably 80 or 90% of the value of this annual planning session. I have been part of organizations, and you may have been as well, where you were not part of the senior leadership team, and you just heard that they were off doing some planning, and you were kind of wondering what they were up to. You maybe even felt a little left out. And then they'd come back and, they'd be energized and excited, but it would be another 3 weeks before they communicated what they had talked about to you, or maybe they didn't do it at all. So just make sure you follow up with that kickoff. So here's a typical agenda, because I promised this in the stuff I put together on LinkedIn. So generally speaking, you want to cover off on these things. So you want to review. So you do have to look back before you can look forward. And you need to make sure that you do this, right? Especially if you've had a bad year or a challenging year, there might be an inclination to maybe not dwell on the past. But in a constructive manner, you do need to go back, and you do need to make sure that you're looking at the revenue that you've, and this is why, by the way, that the 2-day planning session should be approaching near the end of the fiscal year. You've done some work in advance, but it's approaching near the end. So you're going to look back on your year from a revenue perspective and from an EBITDA perspective. And I'm calling those things out specifically because I've been parts of organizations, I've seen organizations where they don't necessarily want to share, okay, they'll share the revenue, but they won't necessarily share the EBITDA. Well, why not? You should be sharing how you're doing from an EBITDA perspective to everyone within the organization. Now, you may have some reasons for not sharing it. Maybe it's been a loss, but you don't think people are going to find out through rumors that you've lost money this year? Why not address it, and why not let them know, yeah, fine, you lost money this year, but guess what? We've got this line of credit, we've got this VC, and we've shown growth in other areas, and so this doesn't phase us at all. right? And so you're just addressing this head on. I had another client that told me that they didn't share EBITDA because if they were losing money or if their profit numbers weren't as high as they could be or should be, people might start looking for work, or they might start. And again, my comment is, listen, they're probably doing that anyways. Why not just let them know? I go back to there's some folks on this webinar. I know Andrew knows Jan Kaminsky. I know my father knows Jan, but early on in my career, was working for a company called Antares Electronics, and we knew that we were losing money. We had gone through some challenges. We lost some major contracts, and we had an all hands. And Jan walked in, and he started throwing out T-shirts, and the T-shirts said, "Challenges energize me," and he got us, pumped. And there was a great speech, and I can't even replicate it. But it got the people that were silently starting to look for work say, you know what, let's go. Let's make this happen, right? We're all in this together. So anyways, off my soapbox for a second here, but I think you should share EBITDA. You should be looking back on your quarterly rocks. So what were your objectives that you had set for the last 90 days to a senior leadership team person, right? Go right down the list and see how they did on achievement of their quarterly rocks. There's got to be a level of accountability, so make sure you do that. Discuss any issues that have come up in the last little while, along with sort of a parking lot of future issues. Take a look. This is one of the strategic components of annual planning. Take a look at your why statement. Take a look at your niche that you've spent time working on from a strategic perspective, and reassess it and just make sure it's the right one. Take a look at your core values. Your core values that were relevant 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago may not be as relevant now. And I'll give you an example, diversity, right? Like diversity 3 years ago or 4 years ago when you were developing your core values may not have been on the radar, but maybe it is. That's just one small example, but just make sure you go through a quick sanity check on core values. SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We were all taught it in business school. How many of us forgot about it? Like I did, I'll tell you that. I remember doing my first SWOT exercise in about 15 years, a couple of years ago. And man, it's a great little exercise to go through. And while the strengths are cool and the threats are interesting, it's the weaknesses and the opportunities that you've got to be adding to your issues list for dissemination and discussion afterwards. So make sure you go through that. Make sure you go through your accountability chart, and accountability chart is an EOS term, but your org chart. What are the major functions? What are the major roles within those functions? Are they the right roles for that function? And then quick sanity check on, do we have the right people in the right seats? So look back. So I would budget at least half a day to look back on the year that was. The next thing that you should do is you should discuss team health. And I'm going to get into a couple of quick exercises on team health in a little bit here, but team health is probably the sleeper factor that a lot of organizations gloss over that you've got to keep in mind. Okay, so I would spend at least half a day on team health, and again, I'll get you into some exercises on team health. And then you've got to be setting some tactical revenue and EBITDA goals for the year. I mean, if you leave an annual planning session and you don't have your numbers, your targets, then you failed, right? So make sure you spend time talking about that. And then specifically, what do those revenue and EBITDA targets look like? And I'll get into detail on what that means. And then set some quarterly goals for your team for the next 90 days. If you cover off on these things in your annual planning session, that'll easily fill 2 days, right? So, this is a typical agenda. And now what I want to do is I just want to get into some examples for you. And I'm just going to do a quick time check here, make sure that we're doing okay. So 1027. So from a tactical perspective, what's your revenue target? What's your EBITDA or profit target? And then what does it look like? And what does it look like is so important. So if you've set a $3 million revenue target or a $4 million revenue target, you've got to sort of dig deeper and determine what that looks like. And I know, and you'll have to forgive me, Alita, I won't mention the number, but I know that Grocer has done this, right? So they've created a metric for their annual target that speaks to the number of deals that they have to close every month, right? And so they've basically boiled it right down. When I used to do this at Titus, what we would do, and we would slice it and dice it in all sorts of different ways, but I would just write all the different territories, including the leader of the territory, up on the whiteboard. So let's say we were shooting for, $10 million in net new business that year. That was our target. And then I would look at it by geography. I would look at it by salesperson. I would look at it by product. I would just try and create different metrics that would enable us to make decisions moving forward. And here's some quick examples of what does it look like. So, you might have a revenue target in place, and then basically, and you've classified or categorized your customers, your types of transactions, if you will. So that might mean you got to do 5 tier 1, deals of 500K plus, 20 tier 2 of 250K plus, and 50 tier 3 of 50K plus. Another one is if you're a SaaS company, you might have a metric out there that speaks to churn. So less than 4% monthly churn is what needs to occur in order for you to make your revenue target, or your profit target as well, your EBITDA target. Another example would be employee turnover, so less than 10% employee turnover, 75% repeat customers, lifetime value of customer to customer acquisition cost of 4 to 1, and you get the picture. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of, it's one thing to go through revenue and EBITDA, but if you don't boil it down to what it looks like, really that is where you're missing out on a key exercise here. So another one, 80% of reps on plan. What that tells me, if I'm signing up to a $10 million number as a VP of sales, and one of my examples of what it looks like is 80% of reps on plan, that tells me that I really can't afford to lose any reps, right? And it also tells me that, really, let's do a sanity check on that. Really, generally speaking, I only have 2 reps on plan out of the 10 that I have. How do I get them up? Or is that even a realistic, measurement of what it would look like? So it gives me little action items that I can deal with in the next, couple of months. 30% gross margin for international business is another example. And another example of what it might look like is we grow the Middle Eastern business by 150%. So, and there's all sorts of other different ways that you can boil this down, but I just wanted to speak to that real quick. So on the strategic front, again, annual planning is less about strategy. It's more about tactics, but let's review the passion and purpose of the organization. Let's review our core values. Let's review our marketing strategy, and review the accountability chart and the big, hairy, audacious goal, which if some of you aren't familiar with the BHAG, it's basically, what do you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? And this should be audacious. Like, it should be something that is quasi, impossible. But at the same time, there is a realm of possibility. And it paints a picture for your people on what you want to be, in the next little while. So when we are at TrialStat, Adam and I were together at TrialStat, our big, hairy, audacious goal, we had a SaaS solution for clinical drug trials. We were actually leaders of the pack. We were ahead of our time, weren't we, Adam? Our big, hairy, audacious goal was we wanted to be the Salesforce.com of clinical drug trials. Like, that's kind of what we talked about. And even if you're not in that space, I think you understand what we're getting at, right? We're a SaaS solution. We wanted to be big. We wanted to be the standard. And so that, you got to be reviewing your BHAG, every annual planning session, and making sure that there's no holes in that. And if there are holes in it, there's a to-do for your next strategic. So team health. Okay, so another picture for you. This is Pat Lencioni. He's written a number of books. One of his more famous books is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so what Pat Lencioni says when he talks about team health, and this is, again, the sleeper, is the ultimate competitive advantage for any company is not finance. It's not strategic. It's not, any sort of widget that they've created. It's teamwork. And it's teamwork that is the ultimate competitive advantage. And the reason why teamwork is so important is it's both powerful, but it's also rare, right? And so let's be frank. Sometimes from a teamwork perspective, things are not functioning properly. And so his comment is in this book, Five Dysfunction of a Team. If you could get all the people on your team rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry, in any market, any competition, at any time. So it's all about getting people to row together. And so, he talks about, the very first component of function or dysfunction within a team is trust. So, there's an element of vulnerability as well within that trust. So you want to make sure that you've got a team that trusts each other. And in order for them to trust each other, they need to be able to be vulnerable with each other. And if they're vulnerable with each other and positive things come out of vulnerability, so trust is increased or maintained, you can move on to healthy conflict. So if I trust Andrew Fraser and he trusts me, and we get behind a boardroom door and we disagree on the channel strategy versus the direct sales strategy, and I know Andrew and I always used to have conversations about this, but if we trust each other, we can have that dialogue and we're not watching our back. Like, we're just having a good, open, honest conversation. And so conflict is good. You want conflict in an organization, but you can't have conflict without trust. So that's the foundation. And so you got to make sure that you go through an exercise. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples of some trust exercises that will increase trust within your organization. And then as you move on up, the pyramid, you move into commitment, accountability, and results. And I'm not going to get into, it's a great book, read it. I'm not going to get into the pyramid, but really at the foundation, there's trust. And so here are a couple of team health exercises for you. One is the know what you know and know what you don't know exercise. And this is an exercise that was created actually by my father and his co-author of the book, Leading Matters. And I'm going to very quickly summarize it. And Mike or Dad, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's 10:35. I don't know if we have time for you to jump in on this, but if you want to jump in, by all means. Let's see if we have some time at the end. Vulnerability is another thing that we can go through. I've got some exercises for you on that. And then there's an organizational checkup. So again, you've got to be taking about half a day in your annual planning session to go through a team health exercise and maybe make the team health exercises a regular occurrence, either quarterly or on an annual basis. So here is know what you know and know what you don't know. So this will help the leader determine what they know about themselves, what they think the team knows and doesn't know about itself. And so what we do is we have a questionnaire that we will walk the team through and that they will complete on their own, senior leadership team, or maybe your sales team, Adam, in this particular scenario, whatever. So, and the components of this questionnaire have to do with strategy and strategic thinking, self-confidence, ethics and integrity, creativity and innovation, flexibility and adaptability, inspiring vision, communication, relationships, teamwork, and manage and empower. So there's questions in this particular survey that speak to each one of these key components. And I'm not going to get into all the questions, but I'll give you an idea, right? So this is an example of the questions that can be asked on strategic thinking. And so what's going to happen is the senior leader is going to fill out this questionnaire, and the CEO or the sales director or the sales manager is going to fill out this questionnaire. And they're going to tabulate the results. So you're going to get a score at the end of each one of these sections. And then what you want to do is you want to create an average across your team, and then an average across, well, basically you want to map that to the CEO score, and you want to look for deltas. And so this is, again, busy slide. I'm not going to get into all the specifics, but this is a team CEO comparison. So each one of the components is in the middle, strategic thinking on down. And so very first thing that we're going to see is we're going to see scores in the high 60s, mid 70s. And this is for the team. This is in the red. And so what that tells us is that actually that's not bad. That's pretty good. The very first thing that you might find when you go through an exercise like this is if you're in the 50s and 60s from an average perspective, you definitely have work to do. You absolutely need to work on whatever components are, frankly, below 70. Okay. So if you're 70 and above, that's good. Doesn't mean you're complete on that, but that's good. If you're 90 and above, you're doing really well. Now, some folks, when they fill out this survey or questionnaire, will game the system. And if they're averaging over 100 on a pretty regular basis, you got to be cognizant of that as well. You might have someone within your organization that is just telling you what they want to hear. So, you go through this exercise with the executive team. And then the next thing that occurs is we compare that to the CEO, how the CEO thinks. Generally speaking, the CEO is always scoring a little higher because they always feel like the vision and the strategy and all these things are well understood within the organization. And the reality is that's never the case, right? So you want to be looking for significant deltas. And, here clearly on vision, we have a delta that the CEO may not have been aware of, or the sales leader may not have been aware of. And we have deltas elsewhere as well. And so what this does from a team health perspective is we go through a debrief on this as a group, and it gets conversation going, right? It inspires conversation. And so, this is an example. And again, there's much more to this than that, but this is just a quick scenario. And then the next one is, you could take a look at the individual's results. So Marjorie, in this example, who is maybe the VP of Business Development, her scores, map those against the average of the group and just see where she fits, right? And so again, this will tell you a little bit about yourself and the group and where things are. So that's one exercise. Another exercise that I'll quickly share with you is one on vulnerability. So again, we want to make sure that we enhance trust within the organization. And there's two vulnerability exercises that I recommend that are quite simple. From a discomfort or from a vulnerability perspective, one's a 3 out of 10. The next one is a 7 out of 10. I've never seen a 10 out of 10, but it probably involves nudity and crying. So let's just avoid that one. But 3 out of 10, really simple. Okay, you go right around the table and you ask everyone to fill out, just a quick questionnaire, or just write some stuff down on their legal pad or on their notepad, and essentially, okay, I want you to write down your hometown. I want you to write down how many siblings you have. I want you to tell us about the biggest challenge you've ever had in your life. I want you to tell us about your first job. I want you to tell us about your worst job. And then I want you to tell us about something unique that no one in this room knows about you. Okay. And just by simply writing down the answers to those questions and sharing that information around the room, I guarantee you will learn things about your leaders, your people in the organization. You will discover things about yourself, and you will be sharing things that you wouldn't normally share, even in the most intimate, seemingly intimate, long-standing relationships that you've had from a business perspective. So that's a great exercise for vulnerability, and it's an hour. You just basically go around the table, you answer these questions, you share the information, and you'll really, I mean, when you get into the challenges, you're going to learn some things about people, the unique things. Like I remember Chris Wright. We didn't go through this exercise, but Chris Wright, who was our VP of marketing at Trialstat, I had no idea that he was a classically trained musician, right? And he told me this once over a beer, and I just thought that was so cool. And there was some, it kind of brought us, like, I understood him better, right? And so, anyways, that's one example. So now let's move to the 7 out of 10. So the 7 out of 10, there's a concept out there called this is called the Johari window. And essentially what we speak to is there's elements about you that are known by you, and they're known to others, right? And so you know, it's out there, like it's known, right? And then there's elements about you that are known to others, but are not known to you. And so we call those blind spots. And when Mike and I do leadership development, we speak to blind spots pretty regularly. And there's all sorts of things that that could be blind spots for people. And there's all sorts of ways to get blind spots out and on the table. But this is a quick exercise that you can go through. And essentially what happens is you go around the table and you ask everyone to write down something about, you know, the people in the room, okay? Write down the most admirable trait of that person. So just, you know, you write it down on a legal pad, you go around the room and they write it down. And then I'd like you to write down something about that person that you would like them to start or you would like them to stop because it's hurting that person more than it's helping them, right? And so it could be something, you know, that they start, could be something that they need to stop or they should stop. And so, you know, you can see how the vulnerability level is kind of increasing, right, in the room as you go through this. But if you get an open and honest conversation going and people are open to the feedback, what's going to happen is when you share that list, people, I guarantee you, will find out things about themselves that they were not aware of before. And you know, whether they want to take that and get defensive or whether they want to take that and embrace that, that's entirely up to them. But it's just a great exercise. Again, it's a 7 out of 10. I usually start with the 3s, but then I move on up to the 7s when the organization realizes that the more vulnerable we become, the more we trust each other, right? So great exercise to go through. And then the last thing you do in this particular exercise is you get everyone around the room to write down one thing or what we call the one thing commitment. And basically it's, you know, in 2021, I'm committed to stop, you know, interrupting people. You know, let's just throw that out as an example, some feedback that I've gotten, right? So, you know, that'll be something that the person can work on, and they should write it on a sticky note and stick it on their monitor, or you can get a little bit more formal with kind of a, you know, a leadership development plan or an outcome-based, you know, plan that, again, Mike and I work on with clients all the time. Just checking my time here, 10:40, okay. And so that's a great example from a vulnerability perspective. Last thing for team health, EOS has this thing called the organizational checkup. And in the organizational checkup, I'm just going to switch screens here for a second to my browser. In the organizational checkup, and you can just go on the EOS worldwide website or Google organizational checkup. Basically, and you can do this as a leadership team, you're going to answer 20 questions on a scale of 1 to 5. So first question, we have a clear vision in writing that has been properly communicated and shared by everyone in the company. Okay, well, I say that's a 4. Our core values are clear and we are hiring, reviewing, rewarding, and firing around them. Let's see, that's a 3. Okay, so we're going to move through this questionnaire, and the questionnaire speaks to vision, people, data, process, issues, and then ultimately meeting cadence and traction. And so we're going to answer these questions, and you would do this in advance of any annual planning exercise. And so what you would do is then you would get the results, okay? And you'd average them as an organization, kind of like the know what you know grid. You'd average them as an organization, and then you would also you would average the total score, but you would also average each specific question. And then as a leader, you can very clearly see what you need to work on if we're averaging 2 or 3 out of 5. And actually, this is translated to a 0 to 100 score. But you know, that's a great little tool. And you know, spoiler alert, most companies that I work with that agree to take this organizational checkup, unless they're downstream on EOS or unless they're a really well-run organization, you know, it is very normal to average out at 40 to 50%, really is a maximum the very first time you take this survey. So that's just another thing that I just wanted to share with you. And we'll just go back to the PowerPoint here. So those three things, team health, I've spent most of my time on team health, and that's been by design. It really is the most important thing. And it's also the thing that gets skipped because, you know, you might have spent half a day looking back on your year, and then everyone wants to start getting into setting quotas and creating numbers for the next year. Take the time to do something that increases trust and exposes a little bit of vulnerability within your organization, and I guarantee you, you will thank yourselves. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. Last thing is leadership. So leadership is something that it's along the lines of teamwork. It's probably one of the most important components to any organization. It's something my dad could talk the nuts off a steel bridge on. He's on mute, so he can't swear at me. I'm a big believer in leadership as well. We've all worked for great leaders. We've all led. And I can tell you personally, I've been, there are people that I work with, that I've worked with in the past that have thought very highly of my leadership capability, but I've also had people that probably didn't. And I look back on my career and there was some major leadership challenges that I had. And really what it boils down to is being intentional, okay? Being intentional from a leadership perspective. And so this is an example. There's a book out there. It's called The 5 Levels of Leadership. It's by a gentleman by the name of John Maxwell. I'd encourage you to Google him. Great guy. You can actually get something delivered every morning called the Maxwell Minute, where there's some really good little leadership nuggets in there. But here's the concept. Concept is you start out at the first level of leadership when you have a title. So people follow you because they have to. And really, that's the very first level of leadership. And most people have that obviously that leadership capability. The next level, and this is really only level 2, is you care about your people. Okay. And this is where I've been guilty in the past. I don't think I've disliked my people, but I've often looked at them as tools to help me deliver my number as a VP of sales. I haven't really spent the time getting to know them and wanting to develop them. And so, you want to get to the next level from a leadership perspective where you want to be not only caring about your people, but you want to be spending time with them to develop them. And so if you're caring about your people and if you're developing your people, and there's a number of questions, there's a self-assessment in this book that you'll need to go through that will tell you where you are. It'll get you to the next level. And the next level, really, it's only level 3. I'd love to be at level 5 right off the bat. No, you got to move through the levels and you can't skip a level. So level 1, you got the title. Level 2, you care about your people and you're investing time to get to know who they are and what their challenges are. Level 3 is you're now mentoring your people and they're starting to deliver based on what you've taught them. Okay. And so that's level 3. Level 4, they're in a situation where they're actually developing people themselves. And then level 5 is the pinnacle. And so this is a really cool book, really cool concept to look at. And again, you want to be vulnerable as a leader to be able to say, okay, I'm really only at level 1. Like I'm almost at level 2, but I need to work on these 3 things, right? And so if you go through a leadership discussion in your annual planning session, and at the very least, just make this required reading, there's another suggestion for you. I think it's a great book. And then there's a couple of other rules for Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership. So no matter how good a leader you are, as soon as you hire a new person, you start out at level 1 with that person, even if you're at the pinnacle, right? So you've got to make your way to permission, you got to make your way to production, and you got to and it's super, long or hard to get up to 4 or 5, but you can drop down to 1 in a heartbeat too, right? So there's a bunch of little interesting rules there and something that I encourage you guys to take a look at. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to leave you with, we're at 10:52, is just another quote. This is by Peter Drucker, and it's another planning, quote. Basically, and by the way, Peter Drucker is an Austro-Hungarian management consultant. that coined the term knowledge worker. He passed away about 10 years ago, but he came up through Nazi Germany, got out, escaped from there, and then ended up becoming really a well-respected management consultant across General Motors and all these other companies. And one of his quotes is, "The best way to predict your future is to create it." And so that's all, trying to impart here today with the webinar. And with that, I'm just going to wrap up. I've been doing all the talking. We have 5 minutes to discuss, but if anyone wants to, and I didn't plant any questions in the crowd either, so please, no awkward silences. Step up to the plate if you got a little comment or a little question. I'd appreciate that at the very least for the recording.
Can I've been silent for an hour, which is like a world record for me.
Yeah.
Just for everyone to understand on that, why the work that I've been doing on leadership, I was never a business guy. I was in the Air Force and all that kind of stuff. And I started noticing that when I was in the military in particular, no matter how well we planned and no matter how articulate we were about what we were going to try and do, the success of every venture in the end boiled down to the team, whether or not we had the right plan, but the wrong team, and so on. And I managed over time to boil that down to, what am I, if I'm a senior leader, what am I, which is, by the way, a much higher calling than a senior manager. Please forgive me if you are in love with the title of senior manager. That's a kind of working level, and it's, you've earned it, great. But if you really want to strive for something, you want to go one step more, which is to become an influencer at the leadership level. And I boil it down to this: when you're leading correctly at the level that Scott's talking about and doing your planning, you're looking to get the free stuff from your team. See, when you hire people, they have technical knowledge and you're paying them, 70% of what they do is predictable, and you're paying for that 70%. There's another 30% they actually have, they will give to you, and that's free. The problem is they'll only give it to you if they trust you, and they'll only give it to you if you've motivated them to give it to you. And so I just encourage you to think that on an annual planning, yes, you have to do the plans for sure, because without a plan, you have destination without maps, or you might have a map without a destination. In either case, you're going to fail. It starts with telling them everything. I'll just say this. This is the last thing I'll say, Scott. You talked earlier about telling people things, reviewing the past. Here's the golden rule of really top flight leaders. They tell them everything, even the warts, the failures, all the things that you might want to keep quiet for, except you have to tell them. Because if you tell them everything, what you're giving them is the basis for their motivation going forward. If people know they're in trouble, the good, loyal people that you have are going to want to dig in with you and overcome it. The weaklings or the weak links or the people who don't care, they're going to abandon ship. And frankly, you're much better off with a smaller team with a few holes in it that's motivated and loyal than you are with a full team where you have weak links in it trying to undermine all your effort. All right, that was my 3 minutes worth.
All right, that's a record. That's a record. Thank you. All right. So any other questions, comments from the group here? And by the way, welcome Kelly and Noor. I wasn't able to see you come in. I disabled the waiting room. So so nice to see at least your names. It's been a while since we worked together. So welcome.
Thank you, Scott, for doing all of that.
My pleasure.
My comment, Scott, would be that certainly I think the spending more time on team health is absolutely critical, because it's something that will sink a venture silently and quickly if it's not addressed right off. And then I'm intrigued by the 5 levels of leadership. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And you want to say you're a 5 out of 5, but taking a good hard look at it, realize there's probably a good chunk of work to do that you need to be thinking about every day.
Yeah, that's it. And when we do leadership development with executive teams, and this is just confidential between us and the leader, you know, they'll self-assess, and if they're at level 2, you know, then really it's all about getting to 3. You just want to get better. You just want to be intentional and get better. And it's not a scenario where it's like, oh, I see you're a 4 and I happen to be a 5, right? Like, it's not about that. It's just, you know, it's about getting better. And then what are the steps required to take it to that next level? And again, when I read that book, I was like, ooh, there were times I probably wasn't investing in my people as much as I should have, you know? So a little cringeworthy, but it really helps, right? So.
Scott, I just want to add the comments. I've been working for you. You were my leader at Titus for almost 5 years. And thanks to your leadership there, I think I improved a little bit. I can make it and learn more. But I'm so happy that you're helping other CEO and other leaders to become successful. If you just transfer your leadership skills to rest of the world, I think that this leadership will be in much better place.
Well, thank you, Zora. Kind words. I appreciate those. All right, so we're right up against 11, folks. So I'll give you a minute back in your day, and I'll post this this recording. Feel free to pass it on to anyone that might be interested. And thank you for taking the time to spend an hour here this morning.
Thank you.
No
Thank you
sweat.
so
Thank
much,
you. And
Scott.
can we get the slides, Scott, by any chance?
I will send my slides out, and as well as a link to the YouTube channel that'll have this video.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.